thinking systematically and thinking about all of the things that we're going to talk about today, which is that if you're going to actually build a truly just, equitable food economy, you have to find a way to connect the dots. And what we've learned, if anything, in the last 2 years from COVID is just how incredibly siloed, how monolithic, industrialized, centralized, you name the modifier, that our food industry is. And it has affected so many parts of our communities in terms of food access, food safety. We've seen where the workforce issues have been. We've seen where the climate change has had an impact. And we've seen where the need for resilience really lies. And so part of the conversation we want to talk about today is really, how do organizations that you'll hear from this morning are doing some really quite miraculous work to really change how we think about our connection to food, how we think about what supply chain can look like, and how we think about what it means to actually connect the dots in our very broken food system. So I'm excited for this conversation this morning. I will do my best to make it interesting and engaging, even though it sounds like, oh, we're talking about supply chains. Are you kidding me? But in fact, it's near and dear to my heart. And so I'm excited for this panel of these incredible men. And so you get me to introduce them. So we're going to start out by having each of our three panelists just give a very quick, very, very quick overview of what you're working on, so that we can really then move straight into engaging in the conversation. So Dylan Frazier, my friend, with the Boston area Gleaners and now the Boston Food Hub. What's your story? What brings you here? Tell us about what your organization's doing.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Boston area Gleaners started out as primarily a hunger relief organization, harvesting surplus crops. And we would do that with volunteers. And in 2019, we we ramped up our programs. We harvested and distributed almost 1 million pounds of food, which we were really proud of. And what we were good at, and what we see is a common issue, is that distribution is often the cause of food waste, or from a farmer's perspective. So not being able to bring it to market on time in an efficient, costly manner. So what that did is kind of open our eyes and allow us to build some systems in place. And what we learned in the last year and a half is that's kind of what our superpower is, as Jessica and Neil mentioned on Friday, that each one of us plays a role in the food system at large, and there's tons of overlap and redundancy, but we all can own a piece of it and do our part. So when the pandemic hit, our phones started blowing up with calls to move food around, mostly for hunger relief. And in that year, we moved 8 million pounds. So we rented, leased, bought, borrowed all kinds of different trucks. We grew our fleet to be able to handle that type of volume, and then adding the drivers. It's a very complex distribution network to manage, because all of it's ground unloaded. We're not bumping docks going from one loading dock to the next. We're unloading on the street in a 2-hour window, with volunteers, often in a very urban environment. So the trucks have to be on time. Scheduling is of the utmost importance. So we did that. And we were proud of the work we did there, but now we're trying to figure out how we can pivot. So how do we use this experience, the infrastructure that we've built, these assets that we now own, big trucks, tractor trailers, how do we use that infrastructure to make the local food system more resilient? So we've launched this Boston Food Hub program, trying to connect the dots with other producers in the region and solve the transportation, cold storage piece of the puzzle. It's often not the most interesting or satisfying piece of the food system. We love to focus on growers and eaters, but that middle point is really essential to making the food system work. And that's where we see the need, and that's where we're putting a lot of our energy to make it more efficient and reliable. So I'll pass it back to you, Jen.
Sure. That's awesome. So how do we continue to, this piece, how do we connect the dots that allow organizations like the Gleaners to start to shift what they're doing, to really think about the connections between the farmers, the buyers, the eaters, the consumers, but all the complexity that goes into that. So Angel, get in on this conversation. So Red Tomato, you guys have been around for a long time doing food aggregation and distribution. What are you seeing in the last year or two? And talk to us about what you see coming.
Did I, oh, I'm unmuted. Hi,
You're good,
everyone.
man.
Yeah,
I got it.
Angel here. Yeah, so we've been doing distribution aggregation for a while, working with local growers, bringing their foods from farm directly to wholesale and retail markets. In the beginning, you know, for us, I've been with the organization for 20 years. So in the beginning for us, it was like, it was a lot of the work was really our theory of change was centered around the deal. And a lot of our work was marketing towards the buyer to get buyers to understand what it was to buy local and not to purchase out of a box, to understand that growing conditions and things like that, what would impact that varieties that we were shipping could look different than what was coming from other places. So a lot of education and building around the market in that way in order to get more market access for our growers. Flash forward now, what we're seeing is that there's a ton of local competition in the market, and there's a new generation of consumers, and technology's moving at a super fast rate that's posing a gift and a threat to our supply chains. And so what we're putting our energy at right now is around collaboration, looking at more, we look at these two levers as strong lever for collaboration. It's time for us to collaborate not only more with the food hubs and our allies that are doing the same work as us, but also to collaborate with people that we are unlikely to collaborate in the past, the people that we feared collaboration with, like the Walmarts of the world or places like that. And it's because we've reached a moment in the food system where now we really need to work hard to differentiate our local growers and gain them more access to market space. But we're all small grassroots organizations doing 5 to 20 million in business. And it's now time to sit at the table with some of the people that might have different goals, but we can both kind of build our systems together. And so we're looking at strong marketing and differentiation, ways to kind of continue to differentiate our growers' practices and tell the story at the point of sale through marketing and promotion. And then we're also looking at strong levers around collaboration and collaborating with folks close to us, but also with folks we might be unlikely used to collaborating with. So we're exploring a lot of that stuff right now.
Angel, I said this earlier, you do not sound like you run a nonprofit, my friend. You're talking about it and Dylan too, you're guys talking about it from a business perspective. What are we doing to create business opportunities? So it's really an interesting moment to think about kind of this. I feel like there's a shift in all of our work of moving from being in a position of begging and sitting on the outside and asking, how do we get a seat at the table, to saying, no, we're at the table now. So now let's talk about how we change the system. And so there is a very powerful shift that's happening here. So Mike, you are a person who is actually making those shifts. So talk to us about what your guys are actually doing out in the central western part of the state to actually make these changes, and how we're thinking about procurement and supply chains.
Sure. So my name is Mike Webster. I own Tory Hill, and we do two things. We operate the food service here at the Hotchkiss School, which is in Lakeville, Connecticut, right on the border of Mass and New York. And then we have a completely separate marketplace division. And essentially what we've done in the last 7 years is we've sourced direct from our producers for the foods that we need. So primarily around whole animals, beef, pork, and chicken are obviously the three most popular for us. But we work with these single origin producers to represent a wide variety. We have, BIPOC farmers, we have LGBTQ farmers, we have immigrant farmers, we have old white guy farmers. So we really try to represent the marketplace as a whole. So we believe that grass-fed beef and pastured pork and heritage chicken is environmentally regenerative. We believe that supporting local is about access and affordability. So we've been able to contract with these farmers to grow for us the volumes that we need. And so by aggregating the supply, we're able to then work with institutions, working with food banks. We've been providing thousands of pounds a month, at cost for us to these food banks in Great Barrington and Pittsfield, Massachusetts. Community health partnerships. We've worked with some nursing organizations to menu and recipe, some of these foods with families that are either food insecure or have high rates of recidivism due to unmanaged medical issues. So that when a mobile truck goes to supply medical to whether it be farmers or immigrant communities or those that don't traditionally have access, they're going armed with good local food and good local recipes. We've found it to be incredibly regenerative for us. We're able to work with the farmers. They grow it, we buy it, and they go back to farming. So whether it's carrots or potatoes or beef, we're able to spec out, we need 3 animals a month, or we need 100 pounds a week, or, I'll say a lot of tomato sauce. We may commission, 500 gallons of tomato sauce from a company. And then we aggregate that, and then we bring that to market. So for us, we have our retail division. We have folks that just place orders and buy things retail, at full price. We have our institutions. We've worked with the Kendall Foundation. We did the whole animals for the whole region Kendall grant back in 2018 that supplied beef and pork to Smith and Mount Holyoke and Westfield State, Amherst College. Always talking to other schools that are looking to transition to local purchasing, working with K-12 schools. We got Connecticut Foods for Connecticut Kids grant approved last year here in Connecticut to support access and affordability of local foods to K-12 schools. And for us, it's a really regenerative practice. It's a pretty solid business model. We're buying a tremendous amount of food. We want to share that with others. Right now we're spending about $750,000 within our immediate community, and we're watching those dollars regenerate. We're watching farmers improve their herd quality. We're watching them improve their soil diversity and their ultimate ability to put animals on dirt or put pigs in the forest. We're watching the quality of the economy continue to grow. We're watching there be more farmers that are interested in farming, and we're bringing these foods to a market that is in demand. And working with the institutions has been really valuable because it's a way to plan. You always know you're going to need a certain amount of certain things. You can look at your history. And so moving this food purchasing shift, what we frequently do, is not just provide the food, but provide the marketing and the management support. I've been a dining director for 20 some odd years. I know how it works, and it's not always super fun. So, doing some hand holding there with folks, as they transition, giving them, marketing information and, things that they can put into their communities that are going to educate around the benefits of this, really helps people to feel comfortable in making a switch. So it's been incredibly, successful for our region where we are. It's fairly economically depressed outside of the wealthy second homeowners. And so the fact that we're regenerating these incomes to significant sums, there's nothing more fun for me as a business owner to hand a farmer like a $40,000 check. And then they immediately go back to farming. They're not negotiating with the slaughterhouse. They're not negotiating at a CSA. They're not getting beaten up at a farmer's market. They're able to do what they do best, which is farm. And so we feel like it's a really key piece of the puzzle. We're a large organization. We carry lots of insurance. We're able to deal with paperwork. And so for farmers to be able to have access to a K-12 school or, a food bank or, a new market that they wouldn't otherwise have, gives them the opportunity to then be represented in the work that they're doing. So it's been really fun. We've been doing this for about 7 years, really expanding in the last 2. COVID supply chain disruptions were, a huge boom for us. We had a lot of people move up here in COVID, and supermarkets were running dry. Now with inflation, our prices are incredibly competitive. I think the supermarket's charging more for commodity ground beef than we are at this point. But, for us, it's about the access and the affordability. I love the fact fact that the porterhouse steak that gets sold to the, New York City guy in the weekend is coming off the same cow that, ground beef is being produced for the food bank. And so we get that full spectrum of customers, and it allows us to place whole animals in a really meaningful fashion. And that means farmers can plan. That means that they can depend on, getting a check, and they don't have to grow 10 pigs to hope that they sell 10 pigs, but they can grow them and they know they're going to be paid for them. And then they can go back to the process. So for me, it's been really fun. It's definitely been disruptive to the status quo. It's been, kind of a big idea that we've taken small steps along the way. But we're super excited about making it possible for more farmers across New England, because it's one of the most, productive things that we produce in New England, and we make it 12 months a year. So unlike some of the produce and things that we're dealing with storage crops or fringe seasons, beef never shuts down. And so we're able to, work with folks, 12 months a year to be able to get what they need. And it's been really fun to be able to do. So I'll wrap that up, and maybe, return it back to you, Jen, or, everybody's said some different stuff here. So maybe there's some questions about each individual representative and what we're doing, but the fact that everybody's here together is just phenomenal.
Yeah, it's super impressive, Mike. And the stuff that you guys are doing, what I love is this idea that you're thinking about ways to cross subsidize, because we all know that one of the challenges we all run up against is understanding what the real cost of food is, right? In the United States in particular, we have all become accustomed to, it's about price. And this is a symptom of our industrialized food economy, which has made things monolithic and centralized and uniform, and all the apples are the same and all the tomatoes are the same, and they've all lost their taste. And because it's moved from about food and health and nutrition and culture and love to about economics, right? So I'm
Joe,
curious. Yeah, go
one
ahead,
of the
Mike.
great things, we just did a carbon emissions audit here at Hotchkiss, which was phenomenal, to see every little piece of it. And there was a detailed report on what dining was. And, we saw a 20+% reduction in our total carbon emissions as a department, just from the regenerative nature of what we're buying, the reduced mileage on it, the wear and tear on our roads and our infrastructure and our diesel and, all the things that it takes to move an animal. It's just regenerative in so many different ways.
But again, even as I hear you speak, Mike, I oh my God, I'm exhausted thinking about this. Like, so friggin' complicated, people. No wonder our system is so screwed up, is that this work is really hard. And again, there's so much we have to change about assumptions of what we do. So I'm curious, Dylan and Angel, get in on this with me. How do you convince these buyers why they should pay more for a damn tomato?
I would jump in.
Or in your case, Angel, a delicious apple. Go ahead, Dylan.
Yeah, I think the narrative there is starting to change. I think we're seeing, because of this pandemic, I think the validity of local food systems is changing. I mean, Mike just said that the cost of commodity ground beef is on par with what he's doing, We're seeing that on the produce side. Trucking costs are through the roof. We're short 70,000 long haul truckers right now in the United States. Diesel's at a very high premium. And because of the supply chain disruptions, there's not enough trucks, physical trucks. Penske can't get a truck right now for us because Freightliner's not manufacturing them fast enough. All that is contributing to transportation costs. The cost of food is going up rapidly, and inflation is here. I mean, it's a real phenomenon.
Do you think, Dylan, that this is a moment in time? I think most people are looking at this and saying, yeah, they're going to change, give it 3 or 4 months, everything's going to come back down. And now all of my cost of food is going to go back to where I can spend, $5 and get lunch, which I think all of us are saying, well, no, that's the wrong attitude. So how does this stick? How do we get this to stick?
My read on that, I disagree with Jay Powell here. It's not transitory. I mean, is the term I would not use. I think this inflation phenomenon is here to stay. And I think the globalized food system is going to be pinched the worst, right? You know, these shipping containers of ingredients coming in from who knows where. The cost on all that stuff is going up. And what it now looks like is the local producer actually can compete on price. You know, fuel's up, the shorter the food miles are, the shorter the supply chain is. It looks like we can now compete. I believe that, and I believe that's going to be a reoccurring theme of this century, especially with climate change, as we get disruptions in other parts of the country or the world. California is really struggling to be a produce powerhouse like it has been over the last few generations, with drought and water issues. You know, the snowpack in the Sierra is limited. So I see New England producers as not just a nice novelty thing for local boutique artisanal foods, but an actual essential to feeding our population. And I think we're building the infrastructure in that direction.
And I think we'll eventually see inflation taper, but we're already talking about 6%. We're not seeing that change much. You know, we're starting to see some crazy things in the global markets. And, you know, in my opinion, it's like hedge your bets. You know, if you see the market taking off, like, you know, buy in the morning and try to get something out of it. You know, making these shifts, you know, you're going to pay more for food, so you might as well get more local food. But making those shifts will stick, right? And I mean, we've certainly seen it here on our financial management, you know, because we can hedge the most expensive part of our food cost. We can, you know, play games in other ways, or, you know, have to weather the market in a way that, you know, if produce spikes 10%, it's not hitting my 10% total budget, you know, it's hitting it by 1% or 2%. And it's such a key time to make that shift. And I think especially, you know, because there's disruptions and because it's real to people and it's affecting everybody, you know, strike while the iron's hot, make a shift, buy something different, you know, don't spend more, just spend differently. Because, you know, those are the things that are going to last, right? And maybe you get apples with spots, but those are cool apples, and those are dollars that are supporting, you know, cool families. I don't need my apples to come from Washington, you know, $1,000 of freight. I think there's just such a great opportunity for folks to work together. You know, it's a super complex issue, but everybody eats. So the more we can be collaborative and share ideas and, you know, help each other out, you know, I think that's the best way to be able to make such a difference here. And we're so lucky in New England, like we're close together. You know, if we were doing this in Ohio or Pennsylvania, or God forbid a big state, you know, it's a lot harder. So it's amazing that we've got this concentration of people that are all eaters and consumers, and are interested in making a shift.
For sure. And I think one of the hallmarks that we're seeing in the New England work has been that there are some great players that are here, but also very entrepreneurial players, right? So one of the things I think we have all seen in COVID, and we've seen this as well, is that the big guys, they can't be nimble, right? They have big trucks that go far along. They have very structured systems. That's how it works. That is how they make money. Money is about in pennies and rounding errors. That's how, you know, the Cisco's and the Aramarks and that's how they work. Dylan, Angel, Mike, us at CommonWealth Kitchen, that is not how we have worked, right? We have all made it. You heard these stories of like major pivots that are constantly happening, partly to respond to the market opportunity, but partly, frankly, as you guys are looking at, respond to what the farmers have, right? So last year, oh my God, at the beginning of the season, I think we all thought this was going to be an amazing year because all that great rain, and then the rain turned to flooding, and then the farmers were struggling. And so I do think that part of the future vision here, and in terms of how we can be resilient, how we can be responsive, is that you're seeing these incredible entrepreneurial organizations that are coming together, and that we are all trying to find our lanes, so that, you know, Dylan and I have had this conversation more than once of CommonWealth Kitchen. I do not want to do what the Gleaners and the Food Hub do. Oh my God, you guys, it's so hard. And I think you would say the same thing. We don't want to be in your lane. And so how do we find great partnerships? And so part of that is really understanding where those opportunities are, but it is also an awkward thing at times to, you know, at what point are we the organizations that need to completely break the system because, holy God, it does not work? And where are those moments where we have to say, hey, Angel, no, we got to find the ways to partner. So where is it that the comfort comes from to say, we want to be in partnership with Sodexo, Aramark, Cisco, whomever, and where is it we say, no, 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 we need to create our own future? Angel, what do you say to that?
So 2 things to add to this discussion was when we see in the marketplace, what we're learning is that we've got a new generation of consumers, and consumers are really conscious about where the power of their buying power, and they're using that. So really kind of for us seeing how to sell more tomatoes or apples, we're thinking about how do we position our story and all of the values that we have in our toolbox of what we do, being food system change agents, different than a food brokerage, and kind of to align those values with those customers in the marketplace accordingly, based on what those what their actual buyers are seeing as the value for their consumers. So we've got a toolbox. It's now time to deploy that and kind of strike that emotion in the marketplace with the community of people, so that we can build a brand that supports the movement of more market access for local growers through red tomato and through certifications like our eco apple certification, and differentiating local growers in the marketplace. The second thing that we see in this place is like listening to Michael talk about his work in Connecticut. I'm just like, wow, this is the collaboration. There's not going to be there's not going to be a David and Goliath moment where we kind of take over what's going on with capitalism and commercial agriculture. But we can, now that we are established here and we've built the foundation of all these food hubs doing the size of business that we're all doing, collaboration and supply chains is a huge way for us to cut out costs and really create new market channels where we can address the issues of food insecurity and build systems and supply chains that really flow into the inner community for all the community food distributors like food pantries and places that are distributing food currently right now, like Michael in his supply chain. Imagine that part of his supply chain combined with the flow of a ton of produce going into all community food distributors 2 to 3 times a week. That would take the logistics costs and supply chain costs way down. We're buying direct from the farmer and wholesaler. So we're able to remove those retail wholesale margins and go direct to communities and build these supply chains that actually will have some longevity with little subsidies. And so that's kind of, those are the 2 places where we're really looking at as levers, kind of differentiating, telling more of our story in the marketplace, and allowing consumers to understand and trust red tomato and why it's important to buy from us. And what that impact means, but also what it does across the system, but also supply chain collaborations and building new market channels for the local grower, so that the local grower can have the stability that he'll have from playing in the big marketplace that helps sustain their business. But hopefully we could find and build some more lucrative market channels that really give the overall picture of sustainability for these growers.
So what are those channels? Let's get into some brass tacks, people. Like, this all sounds like, you guys sound like we're in like Ecotopia, right? Like, hey, we're gonna like grow all this beautiful food, and we're gonna get like wealthy people are gonna buy some of it, and that way we can cross subsidize, we're gonna get it into low-income communities, and we're gonna improve food access, and kumbaya, the world is a better place. So help me understand.
I mean, I think you gotta jump in there, Jen, right? You got to start with, legislative supports, right? And then you've got to start talking to, your big 3, right? The Compass, Aramark, Sodexos, and then you talk to the smaller ones, right? The Sages and the Brocks.
So what do you say? What is it you say to them?
I'm saying hitting all the pieces, right? I mean, all of these companies are talking about sustainability, but none of them have done a damn thing in 10 years, right? They come out with new policies and they have fancy graphics and they spend more money on marketing than they do on the actual product. But eventually they're going to run out of stuff, right? I think the biggest way to make a difference is in contract management, whether it's, if they're going out to bid, get an ear with, whomever is making a decision, befriending sustainability directors or dining directors, making an angle so that they're contractually obligated to do these certain things, because that's how you see growth, right? You put in your contracts what you want, and then they have to find a way to do it. So I feel like hitting everybody at the different angles that you can, it's easier for a self-op to be able to buy local, but it's also harder because they have a traditional system. Whereas the contractors, they're constantly bidding for the same work every few years. That's how you're able to make incremental change. And if you put, 2% more local out of some of these schools, the UMaine system, for instance, right? Massive system. The work that, they've been able to do to shift the Maine first has been significant. You do that in other ways, right? If they've got a $10 million budget on food and you shift it 2 points, like that's massive. I feel like so much of what we're doing now is trying to get to that tipping point where they realize they need us, and I think the medium-sized ones are probably more interested than the bigger ones because they might be a little more nimble. But the idea is that, if we keep doing our work and we stay diligent and we stay engaged, and are part of those RFPs and part of that, decision process, ultimately, that's where we start to see some terminal, velocity come. And it's not easy, and it's easy to get demoralized, and contracts only come up so often. But, the sooner you can start engaging on all those different constituencies, that's how you're able to really start making these purchase changes.
Yeah, and so this is really about on the side of procurement. And so for those of you in the audience here who are not on this inside baseball as some of us around, thinking about where do people eat, how is food consumed, and how much of it is actually consumed even today outside of the home, and you think about colleges, hospitals, even to a large extent office buildings, and who controls those markets. That is what Mike is getting at, is you think about institutional procurement. So, how do you get those third-party companies? And what we have found is that they control not just those places, but they control the convention center, they control the airport, they control every stadium, they control, in the courthouses on those ground floors, in the museums, all of those places where it's sometimes you just think, oh, I didn't really think about that. All of those accounts are almost entirely one of these big companies like Sodexo, Aramark, Compass Group, Flick, there's a few others. And so I think part of what you hear us talking about is where, if you use the lever of procurement and where you have these contracts, when we think about the menu of what people are purchasing, can you say, hey, look, if you were to simply take a percentage of what you're purchasing, so we're arguing right now with the Boston Convention Center, which is a $50 million a year contract, and saying, hey, what happens if 5% of that contract were to go to local vendors? That's a significant difference. Right now, 100% of that goes to companies that are not, goes to work outside of the city and the state.
And if you can put it in the contract, it's legally binding, right? Now you have, a legit template to be able to grow forward as more and more schools look to transition.
But this is for all of us when we think about from a policy perspective, what do we as consumers, but also as voters, what can we be doing? So again, you think about what we can do to push for policy change. So City of Boston, for the last, I don't know how many years, has used outside contractors for their K through 12 school food. All of that food gets trucked in from New Jersey by a company based in California. Well, we just found out last week that contract is now being pushed back to a local firm, City Fresh Foods, a Black-owned business from Roxbury in the city of Boston. So imagine what that domino effect is going to be on where that food is coming from, the quality of that food, the kind of food, the cultural relevance of that food. And so this is the kinds of things we're talking about in terms of what we all can do from a consumer perspective, but also from a voter perspective, from an advocacy perspective, to continue to push to be able to have this incredible domino effect that can come from it. But it's hard. And so, Dylan and Angel, you guys are in some ways in the hardest piece of this because you're in the world of fresh produce. So you're dealing with things that are perishable, that are unpredictable, right? That have seasons, that have, right? So how do you find that right balancing act around to make the economics work without just always going out and looking for grant funding? Was that?
I mean, I think if you're pointing towards seasonality, I think about a project that we're working on right now in Connecticut, where we're trying to bring food into connecting. So what we've learned is you have a lot of funds going into these communities to feed the hungry and to repurpose food and a lot of what I call community food distributors. These community food distributors are right now purchasing their food from Restaurant Depot and BJ's Wholesale, and getting less quality food than purchasing right from the local growers in the system. And so what we're trying to do is connect those growers with those community distributors and building a supply chain that can actually flow into those communities on a regular basis and cut the cost out of it. So cut the retail cost out of it so that there's a regular flow of food into those communities. And I think I'm losing track of your question.
That's okay, man. We're just gonna keep vibing on this topic, because I think it is one for me that it is this very hard question of because price always gets in the way. And so even I see Rachel's got a question in the chat about what are we doing to promote more local food into K through 12 schools. And it's been interesting. I think people have seen in Massachusetts, there's a push by Project Bread and other groups to say, you know what, in K through 12 schools, all food should be free. Significant numbers of kids across the state, their major source of calories every single day is coming from food in the schools. So what would it look like if we could make that free? But I will tell you that I have been in the conversation with even the Project Bread people who care desperately not only about getting food out, but healthy food, quality food. Having the conversation about prioritizing local immediately comes to the question of price. Well, the schools don't have the budget and we can't afford it. And so Dylan, how do we combat that? How do we combat that this constant thing that it's just ultimately about price? In getting better quality food out into schools.
So I'll jump in there, Jen, just for one moment. Maybe to answer that a little bit. I feel like there's just a lot of barriers in K-12, and when it comes to price, I'm a very spiteful cattle owner. And so I basically went to the school and was like, I want to donate a cow. We want to give you all of the grass-fed beef for the year. So that way you can't tell me no on price because it's now free. And all I want is the menu to say grass-fed beef. And I did this incredibly selfishly. I am tired of telling my kids they can't eat school lunch. So I wanted to at least be able to tell them they could eat it on taco day or bolognese day or whatever. And went through, all of the systems, all of the approvals, the nutritionals, the everything. And it ultimately got rejected because of an ethics concern, because the Board of Ed was not willing to vote on a donation more than $1,000, and a cow is worth more than $1,000, and then the nutritional facts. And I thought those two reasons for rejection were astounding. But when you remove the dollar concern, it's like the go-to answer, right? And so when everybody says like, oh, I can't afford it, and it's like, well, now you can, it's free. Oh, well, so it was a really interesting exercise for me, and it was 4 or 5 months of going through all these things to try to get the school to take free product, and so I feel like there's the institutional barriers of procurement and going out to bid and ethical donations that are all really good-hearted laws or policies, right? It's all in the right place to say like, I'm not just going to like buy off the school system, right? But we end up into these real barriers where there's not like the critical thinking of saying, how about we take beef from our town and put it into our school? And I don't know there's an easy way to do that except to support those that are interested and hope to co-opt a few more.
Yeah, I mean, I would say to you, Mike, I think one of the keys is, and you got at this earlier, which is let's understand the intersectionality of what we're talking about. And that all of these pieces, when you look at the impact across lots of things, how much different it is. So, again, I'm based in Boston, so I'm going to stay with my references that I know. In the city of Boston, there's a new program called the My Way Cafe that the Shaw Foundation has helped get going, which is all about let's get scratch-made cooking back in schools. So instead of food being trucked in from New Jersey and California, let's actually have people make food for the kids in the school. And what are they learning? They are learning that when you do scratch-made cooking, that it does not cost more, right? So this idea that somehow you have to do it in some factory to make it cost efficient isn't true. When you give kids better food, and you give them choice, right? So pre-COVID, they were doing it in a hot bar where you could pick which vegetable you wanted. Guess what? Kids actually ate their vegetables. And what happened when they did that? They were better in class. They were better behaved in class. They had fewer call outs. So they did all this research that showed that, in fact, yes, what seems so obvious to all of us, when you give something that kids want to eat instead of Takis and Doritos, in fact, they do better in school and they want to show up. Of course, this is true, but and the participation rates go up. Thank you, Catherine. Exactly right. So there is this intersectionality that I think all of us, it's really important that we continue to tell the story, that it's not simply about, oh, isn't that nice, we're supporting a farmer. Isn't that nice that we're getting a local tomato into a school? Isn't that nice? Because the domino around everything we're doing. I mean, Dylan, I come back to you, and I mean, you guys started as being about like food rescue, but then understanding how food rescue actually, when you're pulling surplus food crops from farmers, it also supports the farmers, but it also addresses food waste, which also addresses climate. So this intersectionality piece, it's really complicated to talk about. And your eyes glaze over every time I talk to a funder and I try to explain all this. We're like, so how do we get past that, Dylan? How do we tell this story better?
Yeah, I think, well, we can do a better job telling the story, but I also think we overcomplicate it with ideals, right? And I think when we talk about making inroads and with bringing more local food into the marketplace, it's about executing on quality, price, and service. And we're working with business people on the other side of the equation who are probably less idealistic. And that's what they care about. What's the service? Can you deliver every day? Is the price competitive? And is the quality comparable or better? It's that simple. And we have to play that game if we're going to be taken seriously. And I believe we can. And when we start doing that week after week, day after day, that's how we get traction. That's how we get momentum. And I'd also go back to this theme about collaboration. Through the pandemic, it opened a lot of doors for us just out of necessity, where we started working with the Costa fruit and produce distributors. We started working with Katsarubis and other folks. And they're not morally opposed to local food. They're not idealistically opposed. They just need it to make business sense, They needed 1 + 1 = 2. They can't go to their superior or whoever and say, look, I want to spend more on an inferior product that might not be as reliable. Like, they can't, if you're a mid-level buyer at these organizations, that just doesn't fly. So what we need to do is to build a network through collaboration of being able to provide those three things: service, quality, and price. I would also say that the pandemic has also opened up opportunities for collaboration and innovation. One project that we're involved in is the Food Rescue Collaborative, which is a partnership between hunger relief organizations. And what we realized is we can't achieve this independently in our own little silos. We have to network. We have to get out of our own little bubbles and work with each other. And the pandemic forced us to do that in a way where, our trucks could only hold so much. So we had to reach out to our friends and say, hey, can you send another truck, or can you help us move this? And we started collaborating in a beautiful way, really, and knocking down some of these barriers where we feel like we're competing. Either we're competing for customers or funding dollars or on grants. That kind of mentality is only going to keep us small and make us smaller. What we have to do is kind of go after this together. So that's really what opened my eyes, or our eyes, through the pandemic as well.
Yeah, no, amen to that. And let me say that I had the opportunity to sit on the Massachusetts Governor's Food Security Task Force throughout COVID. And what was fascinating to me, and I'm sure this won't be a surprise, Dylan, in particular to you, was, again, I'm just going to stay on this silo theme, at how much the conversation was simply about we have to support food banks and because people are hungry. In order to support the food banks, we're going to put money into the food rescue system, including doing things like buying trucks for every food bank that in the state, it seemed like, at a time when there were organizations like the Gleaners, the Boston Food Hub, like Red Tomato, and like the for-profit companies like Costa and Katsarubas that were sitting on vehicles and could be doing more. And so there was this continuation for me of us only looking at a piece of our industry to solve the problem. And at a time when I kept saying, if you want to solve hunger relief, give people jobs that pay them living wages. That's how you solve hunger relief, not by getting more food out there, right? Yes, there's a short-term problem, we have to solve the short-term problem, but let's understand that bigger piece. And so Angel, in some ways, back to you of kind of where we started with this is, you know, how do you build these, what can often be difficult partnerships with these large corporations who do not necessarily share your values? Where do you find that common ground?
I mean, it makes me think about the food bank, and the food bank with all of the infrastructure that it has that can really support if we're all in a charge, we find the common ground, right? We're all in the charge to support and save food insecurity. That's what the food bank is. That's what the healthcare system is. And so how do we start to bring those players to the table? Like Jessica was saying at the earlier discussion around changing the way that they work, the way that they position themselves. In like food banks want to go to distributors like the food pantry, or just they don't go to the last mile. So how do they start to coordinate that sense in during the growing season to work more with food hub practitioners or people that are community food distributors to actually get that food to the last mile and intentionally support local buying, change their buying power to do that? Because when you look at food banks within the supply chain, and we're trying to hit like underserved communities, food banks almost they have to be factored into how we do this work. The food bank is almost like a distribution center is to a regular store customer, where if the food bank gets an influx of food, just like a regular Whole Foods warehouse, they'll force allocate food into those communities. And us trying to solve that problem, we need to work in collaboration with them to understand those systems, but also with their infrastructure and power and the connections that they have to the people in those communities, be able to bring those people to the table so that we can strengthen those systems once they start going. If that, yeah, that's kind of where my head goes right now. It's when I'm starting to think of collaboration with players like Whole Foods. We've been doing business with them for 20 plus years, since they were Bread and Circus, and we're trying to build you know, we're building an eco protocol, a certification, because you can't grow organic apples at a large scale in the Northeast due to the moisture and the climate here and different pests. So we're trying to grow something, you know, that through the eco certification with scientists that would add value and get the public to understand that in the marketplace. There was a point that I was going to say again. Here it goes, all the thoughts rambling in my head. But yeah, we're trying to differentiate the growers in the marketplace through things like the certification, but we also, oh, there goes the point. It came back. Sorry. So when I'm thinking about eco and I'm thinking about a partnership like Whole Foods, I'm thinking about and thinking about another project that we're doing, the Food Farming and Narrative Project, where we're trying to work with the Scientific Messaging Corporation on how to tell the public what farming is and understand farming. I think of the power of those of these entities, just like you think of Instagram and people have volumes of following. It's like these are the people that can take a small grassroots organization and focus on a specific project that would promote something and use their resources to kind of get us the kind of brand equity and strength that we need, and kind of promote those growers, also build the food system. So unlike collaborations, those are the places where the power lies. Find the common ground that we can both we're going to have different values, but there's some common ground, and we both want to grow. So let's find the space where we can coexist together. And that's where I'm trying to figure out is, where are the right players and where do we kind of start to move that dial? Because we've reached kind of a plateau here with the food hub systems where we're all here, we're in the market, we're banging heads together, we're all competing. It's like, now how do we take it to the next place so that we can really become part of the food system the way that they might not want us to be.
I love that. No, man. I love that. Like we spend a ton of time talking about what does it mean to be values aligned. And so I love that how do we find that the Venn diagram, we're in the middle of the Venn diagram, we can find the place where we all share commonality, right? And so some of you have heard like CommonWealth Kitchen, we took over at MIT the Student Center food court this year. We got rid of the Subway and whatever else was there, and we put in 3 businesses of color in there. Well, how the hell did we do that? Well, it was because it was a moment in time, because COVID had closed everything down, and MIT needed somebody to step in that could take it over, that could solve their problem, which was healthy food, local food, interesting food, something the students would like. And we could put ourselves in the middle, but it required us to make them work differently. It required us to educate them. And I feel like we spend a lot of time, and I think all 3 of you on this panel as well, we spend a lot of time translating. No, if you're going to support a farmer, if you're going to support a meat producer, if you care about these things, this is what that looks like. I know it sounds good when you said you went to a farmer's market once. That's not systems change. That's a start. But what do we do to get to the rinse, lather, repeat of this? And how do we continue to build those relationships that allow us to use the fact that what we can bring is nimble, we can bring local, we can bring stories, we can bring health, we can bring equity, we can bring cultural competency to Cisco and Sodexo and all these big guys, right? That's where, and even to Whole Foods and even to Stop and Shop, right? So that's where I think there's an interesting opportunity. So where are those opportunities? Mike, where are you seeing, as the world has shifted and how and where people are eating and what we care about is shifting, where are those big opportunities for real fundamental change?
I think kind of to the point that Andrew brought up before, like we've kind of hit our own circle of max, right? So now trying to bring to that next level, encouraging people to do what they do well is a key piece. Working with these distributors, they are the ones with the contracts with the contractors. They're the ones that are bidding on K-12 foods. I feel like when you can work with them, support their mission, right? Like they want to make money. Like they don't really care what food they sell. They just want to make money. And so if we just go with that fundamental fact, so, that means I'm going to ask, Ginsburg to feature, my grass-fed beef, right? So they're going to say, great, like, how much of this are we going to sell? How much space is it going to take? And then, what is our margin going to be? But when I can go to, a school or go to an institution to say, listen, if you will commit to taking, our beef, like I will have it provided, on this Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule, right? Or, so working with them to like place it in their allocation, in the system they know, in the profit model that they know, and then they know they have a customer. So like giving them the market and the opportunity to feature those products, then it makes it easier for you, or hopefully them, to go to maybe other clients to say, hey, we have this new thing that we're doing, it's working well. If they're making their margin and, everybody kind of in that piece of the puzzle can make some money, that's some economic equity. And I think personally, like I like to keep the supply chain as short as possible. I like to self-distribute because it keeps one of my guys on payroll. I like to, try to manage a customer individually, but that's not always possible, right? So what my capacity is then, needs to be expanded. So, what I want to do is like work with those distributors, the Ciscos and the PFGs and the big producers that are distributing huge amounts to be like, what do I need to give? What do I need to get a SKU with you? A number, right? Or what type of volume do you need? Ask them, it's not about my values, it's about what they need to make a buck. And then I can represent my values in a new way. And I just think about that from the partnership, right?
But so help me with this, Mike, because I feel like we do this a lot, right? So our work is working largely with business owners of color, women, immigrants, and we're helping them take their products, their services, and bring them to market. So we've got the jerk sauce company we're trying to get listed with one of these companies. And so the challenge that we find is that again, back to alignment, the alignment from the sales people who work for those distributors is they make their money if that product is selling, and there is an entire huge world of kickbacks that you guys know better than I do of, well, where's my piece for me to sell your hot sauce or whatever?
Play that game.
Where's my Celtics ticket for me to? So how do you solve that?
Yeah, you play the game, right? You say like, all right, what's your ask? Do you need 2% back? Is it paid?
But I don't want to play that game, man.
But you have to if you want to get into that market, right? Like you gotta give them a little something. Does it have an impact on the total? Yeah, of course it does. Does it ethically, tear you apart? Of course it does. But if it takes 2% to be able to eat up a 10% market share, you've really just still grown 8. And so I feel like in some ways you got to dance with the devil to be able to get there. And I'm on recorded saying that now, so nobody's gonna want to feature my product. But I feel like that's what you got to do, right? Is just accept that like that's their business model, that's what makes the money. This is the partner that we're going to have to work with. So what does it take to be able to make that possible? And that means when we look at analyzing, potential growth and feasibility into these markets, we have to take account of what they're going to want, whether it be like really crappy payment terms, maybe they only want to pay you net 90, or they want a rebate. All those things have to get factored in. But when you can speak like their financial love language, I feel like that's where you're able to like make that intersection. You know what I mean?
You're making me want to take a shower, Mike. I gotta say, it sounds creepy.
Listen, I do come from corporate. I understand
help
how
us
it works.
With this.
The only thing I wanted to add, I mean, Michael's articulated that really well. It's like, we've got to try to translate our values into how we could make that work within that system, and how much are we willing to bend, inside of like working in that partnership, and what partnerships are right. But we need a mix of that as well as creating and exploring new market channels, because the pressure that the local growers are feeling right now, and this is part of our food security, is to keep them here. And the pressure that they're feeling in the marketplace is not going to get better, in my sense. I mean, you've got robotics in play, technology's moving pretty quickly, and soon, they'll be harvested in the West Coast, all machinery. And so the price is going to come down even further. And so when we think about that landscape, I feel an urgency to start doing these kind of collaborations, as well as creating new market channels with the powers of supply chain and experience that we have. And we know where the food is moving. So it's like but it's also, I like these discussions that we've been part of and these collaborations that have been going on lately, because it's also it's gonna take, in order for those things to really work, it's gonna take more people at the table than just us food system practitioners. We're gonna need the health and wellness people at the table. We're gonna need the WIC offices and SNAP of the world, and all of those people at the table to, once the supply chain gets rolling, to really help get this stuff going. But I see that we need those two levers. I don't see us, like I said, there's not a David and Goliath moment for the local grower and small food, systems. So we need to figure out what are the new strategies that allow our systems to thrive inside of that and coexist with each other, because they're both highly necessary. And we need to figure out how to make that happen.
Yeah, no, I love that. There's a number of questions that are in the chat that are really about kind of scale, supporting small, supporting rural, and particularly from the distribution side of things. And I know, so again, CommonWealth Kitchen in the last year and a half has been doing a ton of work with small, local, diverse owned restaurants. unbelievably painful situation that they're all in, and we have not seen the last of the closures. I think we're going to see a tsunami of closures coming in the next 6 months unless we can find some government funding to support these small businesses. One of the interesting things for me, as we were doing kind of one-on-one technical assistance with a bunch of restaurant owners, was how much they didn't understand key parts of their business and weren't doing things like using distributors. They're all driving to the store to buy their ingredients. Same thing is true largely in the bodegas, right? So a lot of people ask, why can't we do something to get better, healthier, more local food out into the bodegas? And some of this, and you got at this a little bit, Angel, is that largely the people who focus on that work in the bodegas are those health organizations and wellness organizations, and they're not business people. So they don't provide the business proposition for why this is actually a benefit to a bodega owner or a restaurant owner. But what we have seen and identified, and you're seeing this in the chat as well, is people who are saying, wait a minute, this is great what you guys are talking about, but this is all about scale, and scale is what makes the economics work. But so what do we do when we start to think about parsing this out? How do we support the rural communities that are and the suburban communities that are looking for this kind of support? How do we support the smaller farmers at different scale? So Dylan, you've been trying to get into this space. So talk to us about kind of, size of market. What do you do to try to get that? It's another kind of a way to cross-subsidize your work, I guess. But how do you think about this, the sizing question, as you think about your business proposition?
Yeah, scale is definitely a factor. I will say that one of the major elements that offsets the economics here is the support from MDAR, state government, philanthropy, right? At least Angel and I are nonprofits, represent nonprofits. So our economics are a little bit different, right? So we can take on a little bit more risk, and we can do things that a for-profit distributor can't do, right? They have to bake that into their cost of service, where we can do things differently. So when it comes to scale, we're moving a lot of food for hunger relief. So if that truck is on a farm picking up for hunger relief, we can also buy food that's going to be then distributed in the Boston region through the food hub, right? So there's efficiencies that can happen there. There's synergies that we're trying to capture by all this activity in the hunger relief space. And that's kind of what Angel was talking about earlier is we have a huge, almost hunger relief industry here, and there's a lot of money being spent, a lot of people working on it. How do we leverage that capacity? And I believe that's where the scale is, to do more purchasing, more sustainable development. These farms can't keep donating year after year. We can't support a charitable food system on small businesses' backs, essentially, right? Like we have to issue POs, we have to make them whole. And we can do that with the infrastructure that's largely in place. So the warehousing, the trucks, that type of capacity. So I think that's a big key to scaling up. But as Mike said, we need to get POs from these institutional buyers. It's one thing for them to give us all the lip service year after year, day after day, but if they're not issuing reliable POs, it's a joke and it's a waste of time. So I think all of us can kind of put the pressure on them, but it's really the power to cut a PO is huge.
So who's doing the work? Who's out there that you would say here's what we should lift up? That's actually
I think it's not a technical fix. We keep coming at this with technical parameters. I think this is where the soft skills matter, and it's getting to know that buyer and how many kids they have. And to Mike's point, maybe learn if they're a Celtics or Patriots fan, and to kind of like get to know them on that level so that they trust you and it becomes a friendship. And I think there's quite a bit of work to do there. in educating and becoming friendly with these folks, because they're not bad people, and we just need to extend the olive branch to get to know them better. And I think once that trust is established, then the business starts to evolve.
You know, Dylan, that's just so important, I think, in the rural community, right? We're smaller groups of folks, right? And, you know, you're working with one another, and, you know, you might be competing kind of in the same market space, but you're still friends. And I mean, I've just found in rural areas that community development, right, is what goes so far. And that might mean, you know, if a farmer's freezer truck breaks, like, sure, come borrow mine, no problem. Or, hey, I'm going to be delivering up to this market. Like, do you have anything to go to? You know, we're selling to the same people. So like just finding that cooperation, right? You know, I just feel like that's what works. And I think especially in the rural communities, you know, we've still got trucks coming out here. We've still got companies that are delivering, you know, so how can you jump on, you know, some efficiencies there? You know, shameless plug for Marty's Local, right? Does an amazing job of just developing relationships and working with people. And, you know, they'll do transportation, they'll sell your product, they'll do all sorts of stuff. You know, they're nimble. And I feel like that's where, you know, those relationships really thrive, because outside of the urban areas, right, you know, space is real. So, you know, it might take an hour round trip to make a delivery somewhere. So if you can jump with somebody else that's going in the same direction, or if you're going in that direction, you know, that's the like symbiotic relationships. I feel like that just, it makes it real, and it makes it more rewarding, right, for the people, at least for me.
I would
Yeah.
totally agree with that. And it's and the nimbleness and the flexibility that we can all come to the table with builds this camaraderie, where it's a quick phone call or a text like, hey, can you help me out? Can you backhaul something for me? Can I borrow a piece of equipment? And it's not this huge, rigid, bureaucratic hierarchy that you have to navigate through. It's just like, yeah, man, you know, we got your back, and let's help each other out. That's what makes this possible.
Yeah, I would say that I think that and for those folks in the more rural places, or like, there is a collective action piece here that can help, right? So you got that half a case you're trying to get. Well, if you can talk to your neighbors about what's their half a case, and we've seen this with, you know, some of the out Mike your way, some of the colleges out in the western part of the state, like Smith and Westfield State and others at Mount Holyoke have been doing some interesting work together. And certainly from the business owners, we see this. People are often surprised at how much our food trucks or our bakers help each other. You would think they're in the same business, and so they're going to be competitive and not want to share market or stories or economics. And they're constantly, hey, I got to buy flour. Who's in on buying flour with me? Hey, I have this opportunity. I can't do it. Who wants it? So there are some real opportunities here that when we can change this narrative to be one about how are we aligned, how is there a collective here, I do think that this is where you start to see these changes happening, and where you start to see organizations where, you know, what Dylan is doing and Angel are doing, like, there are some overlaps, but they're not competitors, they're collaborators, right? And for us at CommonWealth Kitchen, we have looked at different ways where how do we support what Dylan and team are doing, and vice versa, right? So you guys have looked at and saying, hey, how can we help move food for you? And so I do think that's where the hope for this comes from. And I put in the chat, this is like one of my themes for this year has been that change happens at the speed of trust. If we don't trust each other, it doesn't happen. And so we have to learn to build those relationships. Brian Stevenson from the Equal Justice Initiative talks about we have to be proximate. You want to understand people, you got to get to know them. You got to build a relationship with them, because when you have that, now you feel responsible for them. And frankly, across everything we do, I think that is a key part of this work. So I want to switch gears a little bit, just because we're like in a, you know, policy question, and we're working with an organization that thinks about policy. And so, you know, and City of Boston has a new mayor who actually has a food justice policy, and we're about to have a new governor in Massachusetts. So what are those policy things you would love to see that could actually fix this? Any of you?
I mean, I'd love to see now the the school food entitlement stick, right? I think, access to food is just an essential part of public school education. But with that, I think the funds that are being allocated, need to be redirected. Redirected towards
Where would
local
they go?
foods.
So what would you do? What would be your prayer?
I mean, personally, just to make something up, I'd love to see 10% of, those funds be, supporting either small businesses and local foods in the system, right? If we're essentially going to say, food is now free, or it's an entitlement, one of the things that shifts there is the economics. So an inner city school is going to see, an increase in their participation, increase in funding. A rural community is going to see a decrease. More kids would, potentially not be buying those extras, at least in the school districts that I'm talking to, their finances are like really in the hole, because now that it's free or it's, again, the kids aren't coming to buy the extra ice creams and the peripheral stuff. And so it's really affecting their economics. So that shift of what that looks like, but then thinking about if we're going to spend all this money and all of this focus on, the nutrition and the education that we're already doing through the National School Lunch Program, let's really take a look at where those dollars going and are they then regenerating our communities? Because it's one thing to just spend money, but if it's lost in the the big pipeline, and we're not peeling some of that off, going towards like really amazing, folks that are doing great work, then I feel like it's a huge opportunity lost, right? We're already talking about food access and equity, but now are we going to that second level, right? That inner circle to say like, of the food that we're making accessible and affordable, are we then supporting people that are getting a fair and living wage, that are having access to healthcare? While we are a for-profit company, our employees are all in a profit sharing, like they're all collectively engaged in our success or failure. They have access to healthcare and to retirement funds, and like that all costs money. It's not cheap to do. So, if you have to sit there and be like, yeah, the price of a carrot is $1, to be able to offer your farmers like good living wages and healthcare, then the cost of a carrot is $1. And I'm sorry that we're going to choose not to exploit people today, is really the conversation. So I'd love to just see, all these new fundings, new grants to go towards administration, food corps members, amazing program, sustainability directors, even on a regional or, county-wide thing, somebody just looking at, what that second, level of circle is going to be for how we're going to make a shift, right? It's a crisis that needs to be exploited, I think, for the betterment of our community and our farmers and producers.
Amen. I want to let Dylan and Angel get in there, and I just want to remind everybody, if you have questions, you can pop them in the chat. And even if you just want to raise your hand, we can get to you if you'd rather just ask your question. But in the meantime, Dylan and Angel, policy, what could we do that would change, that would actually fix this?
I would say the state's done a good job of this, but as these Build Back Better dollars, and there's huge money still coming from the feds that hasn't quite landed yet, we need to keep building the infrastructure, the cold storage infrastructure, the local distribution center, like that type of infrastructure is what we need. That's dedicated exclusively to the local, mass grown foods, and once we build that infrastructure, we become a lot more competitive because all the efficiencies that come with it. And that it might not be one, but multiple types of facilities like that. It makes it a lot easier to run trucks back and forth. And it also makes it a lot easier for these rural areas to bring to one central aggregation point that then gets moved around to others. So from a policy perspective, that's huge. And then I would also just put a plug in for a program that we're not really involved in, but I hear great things from all of our farms, and that's the HIP program in Mass. All the farmers love it. They've changed their planting schedules and portfolios to grow more culturally relevant crops. It's this double whammy policy thing where you're, increasing the health of the populations in the state, increasing the purchasing power of these communities, but it's also going directly back to the farming ag community. So we really don't have a place in that, but I think it's like a darling of the state's food policy programs, and it's been a huge success. So we need to, I think, expand that and increase it.
Amen. Angel, what do you got for policy? You get to decide what the next policy resources are, and ARPA. Where would you put that resource? You're on mute, my friend.
Yep, sorry. We don't do much policy at Red Tomato, but when I think of policy right now in my work, I'm thinking I would like to see policy support kind of food banks and community food distributors that are getting funds in for purchasing food to feed the hungry, to feed people, to bring good food into these communities, to have a certain percentage of like 20% plus that would push them to buy local when in season, and then out of, you know, and then we can switch to other farm food outside of season. But I feel like given the pressures that small growers are facing today and in these underserved communities and building new supply chains, I feel like we want we need some intentional local procurement, as well as there was something else I was going to add to it. But it's we need that intentional local procurement to support these farms, as well as building these new avenues for food to come into underserved communities, both rural and urban. But it's also just kind of part of what keeps the small farmers alive. I mean, it's a different market for them. There's a little bit of the big market, but they need these diversified markets in order to keep their businesses sustainable. So when I think of the future, I think that's where we could use some support, is kind of pushing some of these community-led orgs to purchase local when needed, as well as institutions to, you know, start to kind of build a challenge to push some local, so that we can, I'll stop.
Yeah,
there.
man. The power of procurement is real. Dylan, you wanted to get.
I would just
The power of a lobbyist, Jen, you know, having a representative in Boston, you know, they're not cheap, but buying one is the best return on investment I've ever seen for
I've
policy
heard.
work. So if we all throw in a couple bucks,
I think Winton's on the call, so maybe we can.
But truly, the return on investment is incredible, and somebody's full-time job, you know, again, playing the game, you know, doing what we don't always, you know, love to do, but, you know, need to have that representation.
Yeah.
I was just going to piggyback on what Angel was saying about there's a lot of public dollars from other areas of government that flow into these hospitals and these universities, and grant dollars. If there could be some type of barb or hook clause nudging for local food buying, you know, contracts or percentages, I don't know if that's possible, but entering the conversation so that there's a larger commitment, leveraging these other funds for commitments, I guess, from the institutions would be helpful.
Yeah. So one of the things on my list is, in the city of Boston, they passed the Good Food Purchasing Policy. And anybody who doesn't know it, the Center for Good Food Purchasing has done some really interesting work around local sustainable sourcing and thinking about who the grower is, who the buyer is, who the processor is, all the way through the entire supply chain. And they have not done a good job of implementation yet, but at least it exists. And I would love to see a program like that be adopted across the state at all the K through 12s, at any place where they're doing at least public procurement, if we're not then also looking at other ways to think about the procurement, the power of procurement as a piece of this. I think that some of the themes for me for today are us needing to all understand how to continue to talk about this differently, both from the perspective of how complicated it is, but also how, in some ways, how elemental and simple it is. Like, when we create great local, sustainable, equitable food economies, the impact on our communities and our world is so incredibly powerful. And yet it gets relegated to this place of like, oh, that's so cute, it's a farmer's market. That's cute, it's a farmer. Oh, it's so nice, it's a tomato. Or it's, oh, it's big food and it's intractable. Or it's, oh yeah, those pig farmers out in the, in North Carolina, they are so terrible. But we don't want to know our food. We don't want to know where it's coming from. We don't want to celebrate the immigrant businesses that are doing incredible things. And so the more we have conversations like this, where we get to talk about this stuff and raise these questions, and I do think like, okay, lobbyists, but also like really good storytellers who can help to share this is going to be an incredibly powerful answer as we go forward. And yes, Oscar, we have to continue to educate. So how do we bring back like, teaching about food in schools, right? How do we like have people know, all the know your farmer, know your food work? Like there's a lot to do. But sort of last statement, because we're running out of time here. So what's the one thing that gives you hope as we look into the new year? Mike, let's start with you.
I mean, the thing that's most exciting to me is a group like this, right? You put in, 100+ people together that are, thinking big thoughts and asking great questions and are working together collaboratively. So, the people I've met in the years of working on food systems and policy have been unbelievable. And you all today are a testament to that. So that's what gives me the greatest amount of hope is just having really amazing people that also care.
Fantastic. Dylan, what you got?
This pandemic's been a horrible experience on a lot of levels, but it's been terribly disruptive from a business perspective. But that has also the positive there is that it's opened up opportunities, and these are problems that we've been working on for many years. And this pandemic has been like the great equalizer and disrupting traditional barriers, right? And the fact that we're all starting to gain a little momentum and get some traction here as we come back to normal, I think is really positive. So yeah, the ability to collaborate and the initiatives that have been going on for a long time are starting to bear fruit.
Thank God. Amen. Angel, what you got? Last word, my friend.
Similar to these guys is just the way the food movement has been shifted. We've moved from local food, important, sexy, let's get it in the marketplace now, move to, now people understand that, and we move to, there's how do we get food for all and equity and justice and all of that. And and now big part of that discussion since COVID, it's like, yeah, equity, justice, food insecurity seems like the big thing. And I feel like, yeah, I really feel hopeful because of these discussions that are in place in the various groups that I'm in that are moving the dial. I feel like the narrative is coming to the forefront, and we're paying close attention to food insecurity, which ties back to local growers and underserved communities, urban and rural. So I couldn't be in a better place if my passion is in alignment with this work going forward. So.
Amen, my friend.
Yeah.
So a powerful group doing really, really important work, being nimble, making change, taking risks.